In this video, we're going to learn how cognition models interact with equipment models. In the real world, battles are fought by humans who control the equipment that is available to them. So you don't have human minds directly interacting with other human minds. Humans are driving vehicles, they're looking at the displays of sensors, they're reading messages that they received from communication devices, they're launching weapons. So that's one of the biggest and most frequent things that real humans in a real battle will do is interact with and control the equipment. So it stands to reason then that would be a very important part of what cognition models do. So we're going to take a look at that. The first thing that we're going to look at is how cognition models get access to the equipment models that are attached to the same unit. So we've already actually taken a look at this already. So I'm going to go in Visual Studio and go to our EXM cognition model. And in the configure on unit method that we looked at earlier, we saw that this method was going out and calling this particular routine right here, funit get equipment by interface. And it was saying, it passed in the unit, and it said it wanted a sensor model, and this was by interface, so it said which particular interface did the sensor model need to support. So this is just one of the functions that can be called to get equipment that are attached to a unit. So the unit that's being passed in here is the same unit to which this cognition model is attached. And as I've mentioned in previous videos, that unit variable is actually a member variable of the cognition model object for which this method's being executed. So it's really easy to get to it. So you make a call to Flames for that unit, you tell it what kind of model you want, and it returns that sensor. And then normally what cognition models do, as we talked about in the configure on unit method video, they get pointers to the equipment models that they're going to use throughout the execution of the scenario. They make sure those equipment models are there, and then they save the pointer in the class structure. So this is a capitalized variable. That's a capitalized variable by Flames convention. That means these are both member variables of the cognition model class. So if I go over here, you can see here's the sensor, and unit is a member variable of the inherited class. So we save that sensor pointer, and then whenever we need to reference that sensor in other process methods, we don't have to go out and get it again. Now there are several other functions that can be used to get the equipment that is attached to a unit. So I'm going to pull up the Flames documentation, and I'm going to go to the Developer's Manual, Cognition Model Developer's Manual, Equipment Interfaces, and there's a topic in there called Gaining Access to Equipment. And this topic lists the routines that are available to call, the unit routines, to get access to equipment. So you can get it by the equipment alias, you can get it by the class of the equipment, you can get it by the ID of the equipment. All Flames equipment models have a unique integer ID associated with them. So it's not uncommon to retrieve that ID and then pass it around between models. So if you know that ID, you can look up a piece of equipment by that ID. You can get it by its name, which is the same as the meta object name. You can get it first equipment, and you can just say, give me the first equipment. So if you don't know how to look it up, you can just say, well, let me go get first and next. Let me just loop over all the equipment models of a given class that are attached, a given primary class. Each one of these functions takes as one of their arguments, so I'll click on this, the equipment type, just like the get equipment by interface does. And equipment types are this list of enumerated values right here, all of the 8 primary equipment classes. So these are other functions you can use in addition to get equipment by interface. Normally in configure on unit methods, we're using this one because this is we always want to make sure we have an equipment that supports the right interface, but you can get equipment other ways. So once you have access to the equipment, to the pointer, then you can call methods of the equipment model to interact with it. So one of the things that we do often is we retrieve data from equipment. Now, if you go back to the Entity Model Developers Manual, you'll see that there is a video there, not the manual, the video is in the manual as well. There's a video on altering and querying equipment models. And so I'm not going to go into spend a lot of time talking about that, so I'm just going to go to Assess and show you that this is one of the methods that was talked about in that manual. This is actually a wrapper around the fEntity query method. So the query method is a standard method for all entity models, and equipment models are subclasses of entity, so you can use it for all equipment models as well. You pass in the equipment model and you tell it which particular attribute you're looking for, and you give it the address of a variable to return the value. And there are a bunch of different fEntity get value routines, and that was talked about in the Developing Entity Model course. So this particular function right here ultimately ends up calling the query method of this particular sensor. So we have the code for that sensor here. So let's go take a look at it. So we'll go down into the equipment folder and then into the sensor folder, and there's EXM sensor. So we're going to move down into the EXM sensor attribute file, and here is the query method. And we loop over the arguments that come in that mal, and we're looking for first target ID. And that happens to be one of the attributes that this particular model supports, and we know that it supports it because that's what the interface for this particular model specifies. And just kind of made that up. We said if we support the example sensor interface, which is right here, and that's the interface that we specified when this class was initialized. And then in the configure on unit, we check to make sure that it supports the example sensor interface. And because it does, we know that we can query this guy for first target ID. So over here in Assess, that's what we're querying it for, is first target ID. So the query method of the sensor is returning just a hard-coded value 15. So we're not trying to do anything real here. We're just trying to illustrate how the query method works. So we return 15. So in the assess method, we get 15 back here. And if you remember from the output, from the running this particular little scenario with this model attached, we took that target ID and we passed it in. So we looked for first target ID. We stored it in a mal under the name target ID, and then we initiated engage. And then in engage, we get the value of target ID, and then we printed it right here. So there's target ID. So if you remember from the output, the integer 15 got printed when we executed this particular this scenario. So let me go show you where that is. So here's the execution output when we ran, and there's that statement right there. Now executing EXM cognition engage, and the target ID is 15. So that's how we got the target ID. And so this query method can be used to query for any particular value that is supported by the class. So any model that wants to be able to supply output to any other model can use the query method, which is what we're doing with assess. Now there's another way to get data out, and it's through records, and we talked about that in the entity model development. So this particular example sensor model right here, if I go to the attribute method and I look at get record, it doesn't support any particular record. But I'm going to go to a more complicated model, the FEX radar model. So let's see that. Let me close this up and look at FEX radar. Equipment, FEX radar, we'll look at its attribute method. So it has support for a record. So we talked about this again in the Entity Model Developers Manual, so I'm not going to belabor this point, but it supports a record. And then in the more complicated, still simple, but one of the cognition models, the shooter. So we're going to go here to shooter, and we're going to look at its assess method. It's not doing a query, it's actually doing a record. So first it gets a record count, and then it calls fEntity get record. It loops over every record that entity count returns. Get record count returns, so we get a number of records that are available. We loop over those records, and we ask for it, and that returns a structure, which is one of these little track structures right here. And we then can get data back out from in this case, a data processor. So that's the other way that is common to get data out of an equipment model. You can do it by queries to get individual values, or you can do it by records to get full structures worth of value. And obviously the get record is a lot higher performance because it can move a lot more data a lot more quickly. So that's very typical thing that cognition models do, get data from equipment. There's also a way to alter an equipment model. So you can call the alter method, and we're going to do that in one of the next videos where we build a little dummy process method to give you an example of how to do that. A little simple one just to show you how you'd write your own process method. So in that particular process method, we're going to do an alter. There's also another thing that process methods do, cognition models and process methods do, is they control equipment models, especially, well, a lot of different kinds of control. We'll control weapon systems to shoot munitions at targets. We will frequently, very common thing that cognition models that are driver models, they will control the platform model. So there's lots of cognition models that are issuing commands to platform models to drive the platform models. So one of those is actually the FEX driver model, and it's got a locate information, a move information, a move to waypoint. So let's just take a quick look at that. Here's a configure on unit for the driver, and he goes out to get the platform, and he does it here in this set platform routine. And so it's going out and saying get equipment by interface, just like we did for the sensor, and we want a value that supports the FG vehicle platform interface. So we store the platform model in the class structure, in the object, and then in methods like move to waypoint, we're building up a mal from the inputs that are provided to the move to waypoint command, and ultimately we call equipment control. And we pass in the command that we want the platform to obey into the control method. And that you'll see this in Flame's cognition models that control platforms, that drive and fly platforms. You'll see this kind of logic all over the place. So it doesn't really matter what command we're giving it, or it doesn't really matter what kind of records we want to get out. It doesn't really matter what values we want to change or what values we want to query. You can do all of that through the standard methods of the equipment and the entity class. And you know about that from other videos. That's the standard interface, the physical interface that's provided by Flame. So that allows models to be interchanged because they all use the same methods. So even though the particular commands that a model might support could be pretty complicated, and the particular data that's available could be varied in a lot of different options there, the interface is actually very simple. You've got those four main methods: the query, the alter, the control, and the get record, that are used to interact with equipment models. You can do pretty much everything that you want to do with an equipment model from a cognition model through those methods. So that's all that I want to tell you about in this video. That's it. It's actually pretty straightforward. And so we'll wrap this up and we'll move on to the next one. Thank you for watching, and thank you for using Flames.